Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider. You know, Bill Joy, the owner of Sun Microsystems, has written that he went to a meeting of the top 200 technology owners. They made the decision at this meeting that they would not let humanity live. Bill Joy wrote an article entitled, "Why the Future Doesn't Need Us," in which he expressed deep concerns over the development of modern technologies. Bill is warning us that our robotics and nanotech are threatening to make humans an endangered species. There's a breakaway civilization that is forming. You might call it a scientific dictatorship. They are creating race-specific bioweapons. They are poisoning our food and our water. Perhaps they are using music to affect our thinking. Perhaps our musical stars were created by the elite to undermine our culture. Maybe the music industry is being used as a tool to weaken our minds and spirits so that we can be easily controlled and manipulated. I often tell people that I feel that country music, when I listen to it, reduces my IQ. Could it be possible that some of this music is designed to dumb us down? Tonight we will tackle these difficult questions. My co-host this evening is an artist in her own right. Her name is Mhairead MacDonald, and she is a very well-read individual, and she's become somewhat of an expert on the work of Dave McGowan, who's our guest this evening. Mhairead, how are things in Scotland?
They're good, thanks. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm having problems with my mic.
You sound very good this evening.
Good. Thank you.
Our guest this evening is Dave McGowan, and he's written a fascinating book called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, and he also has some great web pages about the Apollo moon missions. Dave, how are you this evening?
I'm good. I just walked in the door from work like 10 minutes before you guys called, but I'm good.
Well, I'm glad you could make it. Hope you're not too tired or anything.
No, I'm good to go.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about your website in general?
My website is not much to look at. I can first of all just get that out of the way. It's definitely not the most professionally designed website that you'll find out there. It hasn't really been updated in I don't know how long. But basically it's got a whole bunch of stuff on there. There's a series of on the 911 attacks, which we just passed the 13th anniversary of, and there is a long series on the Boston Marathon, a long series on the Apollo missions. There was a long series on Laurel Canyon, which was taken down because it's now in book form. My latest project is on the Lincoln assassination, and I think that's up to 8 parts now. I don't know how long that's going to go for. And then there's just a whole bunch of newsletters from back in the day. I used to send out like weekly newsletters that are just sort of just a collection of just every topic under the sun, just all kinds of stuff, conspiracy related stuff, whatever happened to be in the news or whatever caught my interest. So there's a lot of freely available information on the website. And that's at www.davesweb.cnchost.com.
And can you tell us?
Mouthful.
I know that one's kind of hard. If they Google Dave McGowan, they can find your website.
Yeah, if you Google either Dave or David McGowan, it's generally the first link that comes up. The name of the site is Center for an Informed America, but that's not the URL. But anyway, go ahead.
You know, I kind of like the website because there's just so much information up there. And it's a good website to go to learn, you know, and there's still some few links for Laurel Canyon up there. So
there are a few, yeah, I left a few teaser chapters up there. Yeah.
So Dave, why don't you tell our listeners what Laurel Canyon is?
Laurel Canyon is a neighborhood in Los Angeles, within Los Angeles County. It's part of the what's known as the Hollywood Hills, which is I believe it's like an extension of the Santa Monica mountain range that basically separates the west side of LA from the San Fernando Valley. And there's several canyons going through there: Benedict, Coldwater, Laurel, Beechwood, whatnot. And but Laurel Canyon in particular became the hub of the counterculture and the emerging music scene of the 1960s, beginning about 1964. Just a vast array of solo artists and bands congregated in Laurel Canyon, and really that was, despite what most people think, which is that the Haight-Ashbury up north was the sort of the birthplace of the hippie movement, the whole youth counterculture of the 1960s, the hippies, flower children, call it what you will. And most people, when they think of that time, their mind immediately goes to Haight-Ashbury, which is viewed as the birthplace and sort of the center of the hippie universe, so to speak. But the reality is that it actually started a couple of years earlier down here in LA, starting in 1964, and was actually a much bigger scene as far as the number of bands that came out of it, and really was the beginning of the whole sort of folk rock revolution that really changed the face of music and the music industry, and the whole hippie culture was really born initially in Laurel Canyon, as far as like the hairstyles and the clothing styles and the attitudes and whatnot. It all was actually given birth right here in this little isolated neighborhood in LA known as Laurel Canyon.
You said Laurel Canyon became the hub of the counterculture. Was that a designed event, or was that something that just happened randomly?
Well, I mean, we're supposed to view it, of course, as this very organic grassroots, sort of a movement that just developed in response to the prevailing social conditions of the time. It was a time when a lot of people were kind of clamoring for social change. There was a budding anti-war movement and a women's liberation movement, and the whole black empowerment, Black Panther Party movement, and elderly rights, and just an array of social causes that had kind of come to the forefront, and there was a big movement among a lot of people for social change, and the hippies kind of landed right smack dab in the center of that. And I completely lost my train of thought. I don't remember what your question was, actually.
You use this really good description. I like that. You said the organic grassroots kind of thing.
Yeah, was it? Yes. Yeah, so it just sort of sprung up, and we are of course supposed to view that as an organic movement and a reaction to all of this push for social change. But when you really break it down and look at it and see all of the curious family backgrounds of the most prominent stars of that era, and various other just political and military intelligence connections to that scene, and the speed with which it sort of just grew out of nowhere, and how quickly these bands came together and got signed and got recorded, and just a lot of factors. The more you look at it, the deeper you dig, the less it looks like an organic movement, and the more it looks like a planned operation to actually undermine a lot of those social movements.
How did the false flag of the Golf Tonkin incident lead you to study the musicians who lived in Laurel Canyon?
Yeah, that was one of the first connections that I discovered that just was mind-boggling to me and to a lot of other people. Is the fact that Jim Morrison's father, Admiral Stephen Douglas Morrison, I believe, was actually the commanding officer who was in charge of the Pacific Fleet of ships that was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. He was the commanding officer of that operation. So he was absolutely a key central figure in orchestrating that whole event, which of course led directly to the almost immediate passage of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution and the introduction of foot soldiers into Vietnam, and ultimately led to some 60,000 American casualties and God only knows how many Vietnamese and Cambodian casualties. And a central figure in that operation was none other than Jim Morrison's father. And that happened almost concurrently with Jim himself emerging on the Laurel Canyon scene as this sort of larger-than-life icon of the emerging hippie anti-war crowd. So you had this very odd juxtaposition. And I actually have a picture of the two of them together on the bridge of the ship in like early '64, right before Pop sailed out. And Jim Morrison is like unrecognizable. He's this, very clean cut, short haired, very collegiate, kind of conservative looking young kid, standing on the bridge of the ship with his dad. And literally months after that picture was taken, Pops was engineering, overseeing the Tonkin Gulf incident, and not long after that, Jim, the son, with a completely new image, with a fully formed stage persona, a new look, a new everything, all of a sudden emerges on the scene as this countercultural hero, without any mention ever of the fact that his own father was one of the main guys that engineered the war that this whole movement was supposed to have been put together to protest against. So that was a very odd juxtaposition, to say the least, and that led me to dig deeper into a lot of the other figures on the scene, David Crosby and Frank Zappa and Stephen Stills and Jackson Brown and on and on and on and on. Just a whole laundry list of other artists who were also a part of that scene.
You talked about Jim Morrison. He actually died of heart failure in 1971, and he was only 27 years old, correct?
Officially, yeah. I don't know that I really buy into that. There are numerous theories surrounding his death. If he did die, how he died, and whether the true cause of death was covered up. And then there's a whole another line of thinking that he didn't actually die at all, that he faked it and went on to reinvent himself in some other manner. And, there were a lot of irregularities. No one really saw the body. There was no autopsy. It was buried in record time and already in the ground before they even announced that he was dead. And, they went to great lengths to make sure that nobody was going to see or examine the body, so it definitely raises questions about either the cause of death or whether he actually did die. And like I said, he had done an amazing job of reinventing himself between like 1964 and 1965. And then a few years later, he did so again when he decided that he, wanted to escape the fishbowl, and he became this very reclusive, overweight, very hairy version of himself, where he turned into like this big grizzly bear or something. And so within a remarkably short period of time, like a 7-year span from 64 to 71, you have 3 completely different incarnations of Jim Morrison, and if you look at pictures of him, sometimes in pictures, it's hard to even believe it's the same person. And yet, we're talking about just a very short period of time in his life. So the guy had an amazing capacity to reinvent himself. So, to me, it's certainly within the realm of possibility that he could have faked it. And and of course it happened over in Paris, thousands of miles from here. And, so, to me, it just kind of makes sense that he could very well have sort of reinvented himself and gone on to whatever it was he went on to. But, that's speculation, of course. So,
he was also an alcoholic, right? During the time he was singing and in the band.
He seemed to be. Certainly had a fondness for alcohol. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
There was an interview on YouTube where he was talking about his love affair with, that's the only way I can describe it, with food, and how he loves starchy foods. And he would, I don't know, it was kind of weird anyway. But, now, the Doors, they were together for like 6 years. And another interesting person in the Doors is the drummer, John Densmore. And he wrote this book called The Doors Unhinged. What do you think of John Densmore?
I didn't really look that deeply into him, to be honest with you. And unfortunately, I'm not familiar with his book. I probably should be, but that one did not make my reading list. I read there's a lot of stuff that's been written on a lot of these bands, Jim Morrison in particular. But what kind of insights did he have in his book?
Well, what was real interesting about John Densmore is, like, he really didn't want the Doors music to become commercialized. And at one point, I think Cadillac offered what was left of their group after Morrison died, like $15 million to use some of their music in commercials and stuff. And John turned it down, which I thought was really amazing. He really seemed like... Go ahead.
I remember there being some fights over the licensing of their music for ad purposes. I didn't light my fire. Ultimately, end up maybe not. I don't know. I do remember that there was a lot of infighting in the band over the surviving members of the band over whether to license their music for those purposes or not.
I think they also wanted to go on tour. At least part of the band wanted to go on tour with a Jim Morrison look-alike, sing-alike kind of guy or something. And I think John Densmore was kind of against all that too. Anyway, kind of a side tangent, I guess. But there's so much here. There's just so many tangents you could go on.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Morrison in a lot of ways was really like one of the most unlikely rock stars you could possibly imagine. He was not a guy, by his own account, in his own interviews, he had acknowledged that he never learned to read or write music, that he never had any particular interest in music, that he had never sung before, or never. He was quoted as saying something like, "I've never even conceived of the idea that I could sing," or something. I mean, which is kind of weird because everybody sings in the shower and in their car and whatnot, don't they?
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, he said he had never sung before. He had never learned to read or write music. He never learned to play an instrument. He never had any particular interest in music. He didn't even, he'd only been to a couple of concerts in his life, so he hadn't hung around bands. He'd never been in a band. He'd never learned to read or write music, never learned to play an instrument, and yet he emerged all of a sudden as this larger than life rock star. How does that happen? It's just like all of a sudden he just decided, I think I'm going to start writing songs and be a rock star, and even after he was in the band, he never learned to play an instrument. He never picked up a guitar and learned to play it. And after a few years, he seemed to lose interest so it was this very brief period in his life where he just had this mad passion to be a rock star for some reason. So yeah, he's a very, very, very unlikely guy. And like I say, his image, you know, from 64 to 65, just his whole look just changed dramatically. And he just became, out of nowhere, he became a rock star. So it's a very strange life arc that he had. And then of course, as you say, he burned out by the age of 27, and you know, and basically had become very reclusive by then anyway, and had moved to Paris and wanted to be a poet, you know. And
Right.
so, yeah, very, very curious life arc for Jim Morrison.
Mhairead, did you want to chime in there?
Yeah, well, it was. Mark said at the beginning I was an expert on your work, which isn't true. I'm not an expert. I'm halfway through the book, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's incredible. It's quite a dark subject, but your writing is excellent, and your research, it's behind your writing. You can tell it's very weighted with a lot of incredible research. And that's what I wanted to ask you about. You obviously have to be really careful what you say, because a lot of these people are still alive. So you, yeah, you know, there's sort of a hint and an implication, and then you pull back as if to say, well, I'm not going to go any further with that. They were there at this time, and this is what was happening. Particularly with the Manson family and their relationships with everyone else at that time in the Laurel Canyon. I had no idea about that. I was born in 61, so I kind of missed out generationally, but big sort of Joni Mitchell fan later on in life. And I knew about Laurel Canyon through reading about her and her relationship with
Graham
Nash, yeah, big love affair that they had and everything. And I just had this totally Twinkie view of what the canyon was like. I thought everyone was floating about. Yeah. Sorry?
David Crosby initially actually was the first one to grab onto Joni and bring her out to Laurel Canyon. He's kind of credited with discovering her and kind of mentored her, and then she fell in with his buddy Graham Nash, and they ended up living together in a house, and of course, famously wrote the song about it, the CSN song, Our House. Yeah, Joni did too. Yeah, she put out albums. So they both wrote albums directly referencing their life together, there in the canyon. And, one of the more famous, couplings back in the day was, Graham and Joni. And I don't know how many years they lasted, but, yeah, they were quite the thing for a while.
Yeah, I think they came close. I think he maybe proposed to her, but she turned him down. She wanted to carry on with her career. But the other thing that intrigues me is the whole implication of is it Lookout Mountain with the cinema and the input of the military-industrial complex. There was a cinema, I don't know if I've got the name right, if that was called Lookout Mountain or if that's something else, but the cinema that was set up with everything in there, like it had every kind of facility, and that was originally for screening the atomic bombs or something. Was the testing of the atomic bombs was connected with that? Is that right?
Yeah, well, it was originally built. It's up on near the top of Lookout Mountain. It was originally built as a air defense facility during World War II to protect L.A. from attack from whatever, Japanese attack or something, a Pearl Harbor style attack. And then it morphed into, after the war, it apparently morphed into a film studio known as Lookout Mountain Laboratories that ostensibly the primary function of was processing the the raw film footage of the atomic bomb tests. But that doesn't really make any sense because all you really need is a dark room to process film, and you can do that anywhere. You know, they didn't have to fly this stuff all the way out to Laurel Canyon to this full service, which was literally the most advanced, most complete film studio in the world. According to various sources, it was the reason being because they couldn't farm stuff out like other studios can. They had to do everything in-house. So, I mean, they had everything. They had a special effects department, animation department, film vault, sound stages, editing equipment, just everything you need, like soup to nuts. So they could make a complete motion picture, without any outside help. Basically, there was a complete full service film studio. which is way more than you need, obviously, than what's needed to just process, film stock. So there was a lot more going on there than what we've ever been told. What exactly, who knows, but, this facility was in operation at least through 1969, through the glory years of Laurel Canyon, and literally located right smack dab in the heart of Laurel Canyon. So, not only did you have all of these people streaming in, these up and coming rock stars who, to an astonishing degree, came from career military and military intelligence families, but not only did a lot of these people have this curious background, but they also just happened to congregate around this classified military facility whose existence remained virtually unknown. I mean, when I first started researching this, I couldn't find out hardly anything about this place. Even other conspiracy people that I talked to people have heard of like Weather Mountain and, all of these other, quote unquote secret, intelligence, military facilities, whatever, Area 51 and, on and on. But nobody had heard of this place. I mean, it had been kept completely off the radar. And now there's more and more information about it coming out. But when I first started doing the research back in 2008, it was very difficult to find out anything about this place at all.
Mm-hmm. Is it still there?
And it is. The structure is still there. It was decommissioned a long time ago. It was at one time it was sold or leased or something as residential housing, and most recently, I heard within the last year, I heard that it's now been repurposed as a celebrity rehab center, believe it or not, which seems very appropriate, actually. So that's the last I heard, was that it was one of these very high dollar celebrity, the type of places where, your Lindsay Lohans and Britney Spears have to check in for tune-ups every now and then, keep them on the right path.
Dave, a lot of these musicians seem to be against the Vietnam War. Do you think these musicians were set up as kind of a controlled opposition intentionally by the military-industrial complex or something like that?
I think that it was really, to a large degree, or to some degree anyway. I mean, I'm sure that they filled many functions, but one, I believe, was to basically put a very unappealing face on the anti-war movement, because from the research that I've done, people now tend to equate the hippies with the anti-war movement. They view it as one and the same. I mean, those are like two of the biggest misconceptions. And I had them myself, and of what my research has revealed to me. Number one, that the hippies originated in San Francisco, which does not appear to be true. And number two, that the hippies were synonymous with the anti-war movement, and which also doesn't appear to be true. And what I discovered is that there was a budding and growing anti-war movement before the hippies came along, and it was centered mostly on college campuses and was being led by very respectable, very clean-cut college professors and their equally, clean-cut students. And suddenly the hippies came along, and I have quotes from some of the people who were in the original, were original anti-war activists saying, hey, what is going on? Where are all these hippies coming from? And people actually questioned at the time whether it was a government operation. People were questioning it. And next thing you know, the hippies had kind of taken over the anti-war movement and become the new face. And this, the college professor face had been replaced with, these long-haired, peace sign wearing, I mean, it's like everything about them. And I'm not saying to me, because I grew up, considering myself a hippie that was born 10 years too late. I was always kind of resentful that I wasn't born a little earlier, because I would have been right there, in the mix. But, you know, I mean, in reality, you know, I mean, taking a more reasoned look from now, you know, 40 years after the fact, it seems pretty obvious that the face of the hippies could not have possibly been appealing to mainstream America. You know, you had these hairstyles and the facial hair and the wild clothes and this new loud music and the free love and the open drug use and the whole new language with all these slogans. And it was just like, I mean, these people might as well have been from Mars, you know, I'm sure, as, you know, to people back in like Iowa or something, you know. So I believe it was an effort to kind of demonize the anti-war movement and make it much less appealing and kind of marginalize it as a sort of a fringe thing, whereas it had a real potential to really be a mainstream movement initially.
Crosby, Stills and Nash had a hit song called Bluebird, which actually is the code name for the MK Ultra Mind Control.
The original name, yeah, Bluebird. And somebody else, I think, who was it? The Beach Boys, I think, also had a song with Bluebird, and there was a couple of songs that came out of that the Laurel Canyon scene in that era that referenced Bluebird. Which, I mean, you know, that whether there's any connection or not, you know, is hard to say, but it's definitely interesting to note that, yeah, there was a couple of songs that referenced what was said to be the original code name for the project.
I listened to that song today. It was, you know, a live version of it, which has been done, you know, pretty recently. And, it just really looked like all the guys in the band had kind of become unraveled or something. They sounded more like a garage band or something. It was bizarre. Do you think that MK Ultra mind control starts to wear off later in life or something?
I think it becomes unstable at times, and you know, that's why we see so many of our celebrities behaving so oddly, you know, and then they're kind of shipped off to rehab, and a few months later they come back and resume their careers, and everything seems to be okay again, you know. It's just and it's all forgotten. But you know, I mean, celebrities do very strange things. You know, I've lived in LA my whole life. I've kind of followed the Hollywood news, and you know, a lot of it they try to sweep under the rug, but they can't always sweep it under the rug. And that's been true going all the way back to the earliest days of Hollywood. There's always been suspicious deaths and very strange behavior. And, you know, continuing up to this day, you know, we'll see, you know, Britney Spears will shave her head and start speaking in a British accent for no reason, or, who was it? Anne Heche, you know, wander up to somebody's door and claim that she's about to be beamed up to the mothership, or, it was Margot Kidder, I think it was found, hiding in some bushes in a backyard in Glendale, like trying to pull her own teeth out or something like that. Oh. Martin Lawrence once wandered out onto Ventura Boulevard waving a gun and shouting obscenities and just completely out of his mind. And, you know, and they're just, you know, hustled off, and next thing you know, they seem to be back to normal, and it's all forgotten. And, but yeah, you know, I mean, there's just a lot of signs that mind control just really runs rampant in Hollywood. And has for a really long time.
Go ahead, Mhairead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you think the seeds of that were planted in the era that you're talking about, the 60s at Laurel Canyon? Do you think that's where they started to really experiment with people in large groups like that and the music scene? I mean, there were infiltrators in there, weren't there, kind of keeping an eye on things anyway, because they were seen as insurgents or whatever the hell. And there'd be an awful lot of drugs around as well. But over and above that, do you think that's where they started to kind of test it out on people?
I think, well, it definitely escalated and, during that period, whether it began then, that's hard to say. I don't know how far back it goes, but, that seemed like a time when they were definitely, doing some wholesale experimentation at the very least to, sort of learn how to apply these, individual mind control techniques on a mass level, on a population wide level. To me anyway. I mean, to me, the whole, Woodstock, and of course everybody has all these, glowing memories of Woodstock, but, 90% of the people that have those memories weren't actually there. Everybody that was alive back then likes to claim that they were at Woodstock, but, I mean, the whole Woodstock thing just looks to me like a big giant, open air MK Ultra experiment. You take all these kids, you basically imprison them in this field to where they literally were trapped there. They couldn't leave. They were deprived of sleep, deprived of food, deprived of water, deprived of sanitation, and just, bombarded with this loud music, like round the clock for like 3 days or something, and drugged, repeatedly. They were, the promoters were, handing out acid to the crowd like it was, sticks of gum or something, so, things like that, and Monterey Pop, and the notorious Altamont concert, all of those really just reek kind of sort of mass experimentation and mass drugging and,
Yeah.
That's,
I mean,
so
they were giving away like tens of thousands of hits of LSD at places like Monterey. I mean, who does that? You don't see anybody going around today, like, handing out tens of thousands of, I mean, they were putting it in the food. I mean, they were drugging people that didn't even know they were being drugged, It's just like, here, have a sandwich, and, I mean, it's kind of unusual I mean, who was financing all of that? Who was paying for all of that? All these free drugs that were being, and see, every one of these events, it happened at the Human Being in San Francisco. Again, they were, Owsley's people were running around just handing the stuff out for free.
So Owsley was the guy you mentioned that was probably more prevalent than Timothy Leary, is that right? Did he have his own laboratory? And
he did more to turn on the country than anyone. Yeah, he cranked out. I mean, he was turning out just tens of thousands of tabs of acid. He was this. He was the ace LSD chemist of the time, and with deep political and intel connections through his family, going way back. He had various politicians and whatnot in his family, very prominent people, and he himself had worked in radio intelligence, and and then he became the the acid guru of the 1960s, the guy who supplied all these big events. I mean, if there was a big event going on, he would be there handing out just literally tens of thousands of tabs of acid. And it was legal, up and through like 1967 or something, which is, a little unusual that, much less harmful drugs were outlawed, but LSD, they didn't bother to, criminalize that until, like 1967 or something like that, I think. So, there's a very strange set of circumstances there that it was legal and readily available for free, to anyone that wanted it. I mean, some people write that off as the spirit of the times. That was just the way it was, everybody wanted to turn the world on, but, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of that myself, so.
Some people didn't come back mentally from it. They're probably still in a mental home somewhere, never able to come back from that experience. Not everybody would have had a great trip.
No, it's a very unpredictable drug, to say the least, depending on the environmental factors and how much you take and who you're with. And, Yeah, it can be one of the most enjoyable experiences of your life, or one of the absolutely most horrifying experiences of your life.
What was the name of that guy again that was supplying everyone with all the acid?
Augustus Stanley Owsley the third, I think, something like that. I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like if you'd never taken it before and didn't even know you'd been given it. You know, if you were like slipped it in a sandwich at a concert or something, and all of a sudden just all this weird stuff's happening and you have no idea why. That's not necessarily going to be a very pleasant experience for you, you know, and you're surrounded by mobs of just mobs of humanity, and the little music pounding. I mean, that had to have been not such a good experience for a lot of people. And like you say, you know, a lot of them could have been just permanently unhinged by those types of experiences.
You were saying these people at Woodstock were deprived of food and water. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it wasn't very well planned, you know, whether deliberately or not. They did not have nearly enough food to go around. They didn't have nearly enough water to go around. You know, I mean, there was a lot more people showed up than what were supposed to be there. Just logistically, it was just a complete nightmare. They did not have nearly enough outhouses, you know, not adequate sanitation. And then it started raining, and it got all flooded and muddy, and everybody's sleeping bags and whatnot got sopping wet, and the sewage from the outhouses started mingling with the groundwater, and I mean, it was just not, despite what a lot of people like to think, you know, the stories I've heard, it was not the best conditions to be in, and these people were trapped there, you know. I mean, some of them had abandoned their car up to like a few miles away, you know. I mean, there were just lines of abandoned parked cars leading out of there, so there was no way to get out of there once you got in, you know, realistically. So they were basically trapped in those conditions, whether they were enjoying themselves or not. And, you know, I mean, to me, it doesn't sound all that enjoyable to be, you know, out in the rain, wallowing in raw sewage, hungry, thirsty, you know, getting drugged out of your mind and unable to sleep, you know, because there's nothing to sleep on but mud, and the music's pounding. And I mean, you know, it's, I don't know. It doesn't sound like,
how many people?
Doesn't sound like a good weekend to me, but, you know, I wasn't there, so I don't know.
How many people were at Woodstock? Do you know? I don't know.
500,000, I believe.
500,000. My.
That's the number that's usually thrown out there. Yeah. And, in a facility that was never, I mean, it wasn't even a real facility. It was some guy's, you know, farmland, basically. And, so, you know, logistically, they did not have, they were nowhere close to being prepared for that kind of a crowd in that kind of a venue.
How many bands do you remember?
Oh, gosh. I don't know, a lot. Probably a few dozen.
And did they play around the clock?
Oh, they didn't play around the clock. I think they played late and then started up early. But you know, I think they did stop during the night, as far as I know, for a while.
Interesting.
I think Jimi Hendrix woke. I think the final morning, I believe, is when Jimi Hendrix woke them all up with start playing the Star Spangled Banner at the crack of dawn with all the distortion and feedback and all that.
Can you imagine? Yeah, that would have been really horrible, I would think. You know, to wake up at the crack of dawn after you not slept and not eaten.
After 2 days of nonstop partying and living in filth, and yeah, that would. I mean, it was a chance to see, you know, like 36 bands together that were just absolute. I mean, you'd never see that lineup of talent today anywhere, you know. So.
You know, that's one thing I wanted to kind of get to, see what your thoughts on that were. It seemed that some of these guys were real musicians, and some of them kind of became musicians over time. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, like Jimi Hendrix was, well, I'm sure was a great guitarist before he became famous. You know, he just didn't become that overnight. But when you see a band like the Monkees, you know, you're thinking, now, you know what I'm saying? Go ahead.
Yeah. Some of these bands, well, that's another thing that kind of argues against this being an organic, a truly organic movement, is that some of these bands did not seem to just come together in a natural kind of way where, you know, there's a bunch of guys hanging around and, hey, I'm a guitarist and you're a bass player and you're a drummer and we have similar musical tastes. Why don't we, you know, it wasn't really like that. Some of them were literally cast just as much as the Monkees were cast. And the Byrds were a prime example. And they were the very first band out of the gate, the ones that really set off the whole folk rock revolution with the release of Mr. Tambourine Man. And I mean, they were just as manufactured as could be, really. You know, the only really accomplished musician in the band was McGowan, Jim, later Roger McGowan, or was it Roger and later Jim? I don't know, whatever it was. He started off with one name and changed it. But he was a very accomplished 12-string guitarist, and he kind of gave them their signature 12-string sound. But the rest of the guys, the drummer, Michael Clark, and the other band member, you know, they admit this. You can find it in the literature. It's readily admitted that the guy had never played drums in his life. He was like a bongo player or something. He'd play bongos down on the beach, you know, but he'd never held a set of drumsticks in his hands. And the bass player, Chris Hillman, was recruited from a bluegrass band. He was a bluegrass mandolin player, and a very good bluegrass mandolin player, but, you know, a bluegrass mandolin player is pretty far removed from a bass guitarist in a rock band, you know, so, and then you had, you know, David Crosby and Gene Clark, who could play guitar well enough to write and whatnot, but not really well enough to, you know, perform their songs on stage or in the studio. So you had this band where, you know, you had one very good guitarist, two passable guitarists, and their entire rhythm section had never picked up an instrument, their instruments in their life, you know. So how good could they possibly be, you know, when your entire rhythm section, which drives the band, has literally never played their instruments before, you know. So, and it's acknowledged that the drummer Clark was cast specifically because he resembled Brian Jones. And they thought that's what a rock musician should look like. So he was basically cast for his look, and not at all for his musical abilities. So, these guys had to learn to play their instruments as they went along. And some of them, you know, ultimately became pretty skilled musicians, and, you know, some of them didn't. But, you know, the reality is that in the beginning, they were not necessarily all that skilled on their instruments, and they did not play their instruments in the studio. You know, the early Byrds albums, and along with the Mamas and the Papas and the Turtles and a lot of the other Laurel Canyon bands, the songs were recorded by studio musicians. Very accomplished studio musicians played them. And the Byrds didn't really write very much of their early material. I think like half the songs on their first album were like Bob Dylan songs. And they also did like Pete Seeger, and basically what their first album consisted of taking other people's songs, having studio musicians record it, and then having some of the band members, you know, basically add vocals and you know, vocal harmony, lead vocals and harmonies, and then, you know, put that out as a Byrds album, as if they had done it all themselves, you know, which they hadn't. You know, they hadn't written the songs and they hadn't played the songs. So you know, they definitely had a very manufactured quality to it, you know, and And you mentioned the Monkees, who were very
Yep.
much a part of that Laurel Canyon scene, and who, lived among and partied among the quote unquote real bands. And, you can find pictures from that era of like Mickey Dolenz hanging out with, David Crosby and Eric Clapton and Mama Cass and, people look at this and go, what is he doing there? He's not he's just some actor on some stupid TV show, but the reality is that, these other bands knew something that the public did not, which is that the studio musicians who were recording the Monkees albums were also recording their albums, so they didn't necessarily look down on these, on them as being, a quote unquote fake band, because they weren't really any more fake than, and a lot of these people actually auditioned to be Monkees. And, if they hadn't have gotten turned, like Stephen Stills auditioned to be on the show and was turned down because he had bad teeth and a receding hairline, So, if those auditions had gone another way, Stephen Stills' career arc would have been very much different than what it was. He would never have been in Buffalo Springfield and Manassas and CSN and CSNY and be this, iconic figure that's, been on the music scene for some 40 years now. He would be like, he would be viewed in the same way that like Davy Jones is viewed, the real bands, quote unquote real bands, weren't necessarily any more real than the notoriously fake Monkees, who did learn to play, who could play their instruments and did learn to write songs, and on some of their later albums, wrote their own music and whatnot, and they were every bit as much real musicians towards the end of the Monkees thing as the other bands. So,
Mhairead, did you have something you wanted to say there?
Yeah, I was interested in what you said in your preface about how when you're doing your research, you look for anomalies, and you also do that pattern recognition, which a good researcher will do that. And I was thinking about the other book that you wrote, Program to Kill.
Uh-huh.
And coming from that, with that same kind of style of researching and writing, and looking at Laurel Canyon with that same implication of pattern recognition, and stumbling across the information about Veto and the Freaks, and his kind of similarity to, Charles Manson and the family. I just would like to talk about that. See, I'm interested in the dark side of this thing. I'm not rock fans, like, who cares?
We're about a minute from the break, so Dave, you might want to start there, but you'll probably be interrupted by the music. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, Veto. Yeah, Vito's an interesting figure. I had never heard of the guy, knew nothing about him, and had a hard time finding out much about him. His name would come up in various books, just kind of in passing. The author would just kind of throw out a little reference to Veto and the Freaks or Vito Pelicus or whatever.
All right, we'll be right back, folks. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider. Remember, we are listener-supported radio, so please press that PayPal button, make a donation. I'm speaking with Dave McGowan today, and I have a co-host, Mhairead MacDonald. And Mhairead, why don't you tell everyone about your website briefly and about your art? Can you do that?
Yeah, the website is www.selkiedreams.co.uk, and I have to sort of set a few more things up there, but come and have a look at my work, and if you want to buy something, that would be even better. So yeah, it's very new, so I'm still kind of learning to drive it, really.
Dave, why don't you tell everyone about your website again and the book we're talking about?
The book is Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, and my website is at www.davesweb.cnchost.com, or just Google Dave McGowan or David McGowan. Probably the easiest way to find it. And there is a link on my homepage, several of them actually. The cover shot of my book is the link to the order page where you can order directly signed copies directly from me, rather than giving your money to the evil Amazon people. So, so for anyone that wants a signed copy, and my prices actually are pretty competitive with Amazon, although they're not easy to compete with. I gotta say, it's pretty discouraging when they can sell my own book for less than I can. You know?
Really?
But, wow. Yeah, they have so much buying power. You know, I mean, they basically force the publishers to give them the books like so cheaply that they can deeply discount them and still make a tidy profit, and makes it very hard. But wow. I may offer free shipping, you know, and so you know they're tough to compete with. But I'm doing my best, and so if anybody wants a signed copy and they're willing to pay $1 or $2 more than what Amazon will give it to you for, you can get them from me through my website. And Program to Kill also, actually, the previous book that we were talking about is also available, signed copies of that one.
Now I'm hearing some kids in the background. That's not
my neighbors are out in their pool because it's like 100, it's 106 o'clock right now and it's still 100 degrees here.
Oh my. Now are you in California, Arizona, where?
Southern California, LA.
Are you getting hit by the drought?
Yeah, it's been just a ridiculously dry year. And, I actually walk my dog every day over in the Big Tahunga Wash, which is just a couple blocks from my house, which is part of the LA River system. And for the first 3 years that I lived here, it flowed continuously throughout the year. And it dried up about 6 months ago, and there has not been a drop of water in it ever since. So it is just ridiculously dry and parched out there, and just ripe for a wildfire, actually.
Yeah, there's a dog.
Yeah, that's my dog. She thinks it's time. She heard me talking about taking her for a walk, so now she thinks it's time to get up.
She knows that word, doesn't she?
She's a smart girl, yeah. So I'll give her some bones to keep her out of my hair for a little while. Yeah, she's very impatiently awaiting her evening walk. So,
sure.
But I'm not in any big hurry because, like I say, it's still 100 degrees here at 6 o'clock. So I'm hoping that it's going to cool off a little bit in the next hour. But
that's see. Hot. That's very hot. What kind of dog?
She's a Doberman.
A Doberman. I have a Rottweiler and a Rottweiler mix.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, Mhairead, you have a lab, right?
Yeah, I've got a very ordinary black Labrador who's just incredibly laid back and sound asleep right next to me just now.
Yeah, mine is super mellow too. She has like zero heat tolerance. She's not a summer dog at all. I guess wearing a jet black coat all summer isn't the best thing to do.
Sure.
So, but yeah, it's actually been a pretty moderate summer here, despite all the predictions that we were going to have this hellaciously hot summer. It hasn't been that bad until just the last few days. We hit this sort of end of summer, last gasp of summer heat spell, which hopefully is I think it's supposed to carry through till like Tuesday, and then hopefully that will be the last gasp of summer. So we'll see, because we really need a nice wet fall and winter here, but whether we'll get it remains to be seen. So.
Before the break, Mhairead, you were asking Dave about pattern recognition or something about the dark side of all this. Can you repeat that?
Well, I was trying to be clever and introduce the topic of Veto and the freaks and the sort of, in chapter 7, I think there's a quote from a member of the Polikas family. You had an email correspondence with one of them? Because you were saying it was quite difficult to find out about him, yeah?
It was very difficult, yeah, and at first I didn't even think it was important. Like I said, I'd come across just these little fragmentary facts, a little something, one little thing in this book, one little thing on this book, and they tossed the name out. And the first several times I came across it, I just basically ignored it. I'm like, I've never heard of this guy. He doesn't seem very important. I'll just, doesn't seem like he's really an integral part of the story. So I just ignored it. And, but it kept coming up. So I then started collecting these facts and going back and digging up the ones that I had skipped over initially and sort of piecing the story together. And then, ultimately, was able to correspond with a family member who requested anonymity because he said he'd already gotten heat from the family before for talking about spilling family secrets, so to speak. And so there was definitely a mixed reaction from the Palikas family. Some members were not at all happy with my initial portrayal of Veto, and but this one family member said that it was actually pretty accurate, and he helped me to make it more accurate. And so I was able to, ultimately piece together a fairly detailed account of his life. And very interesting character. Was a sculptor, considered himself a sculptor, and ran a sculpture studio in the 50s and early 60s, and with a very elite celebrity clientele. His clientele included like Mickey Rooney and Jonathan Winters, I think. Some pretty big Hollywood names. And then towards the early to mid 60s, then he sort of transformed into Veto, the leader of the Freak Troupe, who were this band of freeform dancers, mostly females, and a lot of them very young. So he was he's kind of a very Manson-esque character in that he had this entourage of very young girls around him who tended to do what he told them to do. He sort of had his own little Charlie Manson style cult, and he was actually hugely influential on the scene. He was a key figure in initially launching and building up audiences for these bands, because what they would go out to the clubs every night, him and his entourage, and they would sort of take over the dance floor in these clubs where the bands were playing, and just put on these wild these dance shows kind of. And there's a lot of quotes in the book from people on the scene who acknowledge that when this scene first started, nobody knew who these bands were. They were all, new bands, newly formed, just spilling out of the canyon. And all the clubs that they were playing were brand new, just opening up or just reopening. So these clubs didn't really have a clientele, and these bands, hadn't made a name for themselves. So there was no real compelling reason for people to venture out to see them. And so that's one of the key roles that these people played was in filling the clubs, because according to a lot of people on the scene, the real attraction wasn't so much on the stage as it was on the dance floor, and people were coming more to see what was going on in the crowd than they were to see what was on the stage. So this troupe led by Veto, who happened to be related by marriage to the Rockefeller family, of all people.
Wow.
Was a key figure in launching and building an audience for these bands. And he provided the Byrds with their rehearsal space by various accounts. They actually used his studio for rehearsal space. Supposedly booked their first concert for them. So he was like a very, very, very critical figure in launching and really building an audience for this whole scene. So much so that when the Byrds went on their first national tour, they actually took them a chunk of them with them on tour and had them doing the same thing in clubs all across the nation. They brought the sideshow with them when they were on tour. partly because it drew in the crowds, and partly to draw attention away from the fact that these guys weren't, as we talked about before the break, they weren't all that skilled musicians, especially, given the fact that the rhythm section had never even played their instruments before. They needed something to distract attention away from the fact that the music on the stage didn't necessarily sound the same as it did on the records. So these guys filled a variety of functions, really, getting people in there, diverting their attention away from the stage, and really helping to launch and build the careers of a lot of these bands, of Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, the Doors, the Byrds, Buffalo Springfield. They followed all of them around from club to club and brought the crowds in. The club owners would actually let them in free and welcome them with open arms, because wherever the freaks were, that's where the crowds were going to go.
So you have also the connection with him and Kenneth Anger, and wanted to make a film with his son, his little young son, Godo.
Yeah, apparently, he had some connection to Kenneth Anger, who, of course, was connected to Anton LaVey and Church of Satan up in San Francisco, and an underground filmmaker whose films were just riddled with occult imagery and whatnot, which, not surprisingly, given the titles of the films, like Lucifer Rising and whatnot. So, he had apparently initially cast Godot to play Lucifer in Lucifer Rising. This little 3-year-old blonde-headed angelic kid had been cast to play Satan. Why? Kenneth Anger would probably be able to answer that much better than I. But for some reason, something he saw in this kid, he saw him as embodying Satan. And but then he died in a freak accident when he was just 3 years old. And so the part ended up going to Bobby Beausoleil of the Manson family. So there's a lot of really strange interconnections between the Church of Satan, Veto, and the Manson family, and a lot of very weird interconnections and parallels in there between those groups.
And did that ring alarm bells for you in what I was saying earlier about pattern recognition and looking at the Program to Kill set up with pedophile rings and that kind of thing? Did you start to see something similar going on there, that it could have been a possible interaction with that group?
Yeah, there were a lot of red flags around the death of Veto Polikas, including the fact that there's like 4 or 5 different versions of how he supposedly died. A lot of conflicting accounts about how he died. He just happened to die on, I think it was December 23rd, on or about the winter solstice, and literally just hours before Christmas morning. And yet his parents went out that night and danced at the clubs, just like they did every other night, almost like they went out and celebrated. And he died at like 6:30 in the evening or something like that. And like within like an hour or two later, they're out on the Sunset Strip hitting the clubs, dancing away like nothing happened. Their only child, your only child dies 2 days before Christmas morning, and you go out and dance in the clubs, so, the timing of it, the fact that there are so many conflicting stories about it, the strange, Kenneth Anger connection, just a lot of things about it that suggest to me that it wasn't necessarily an accidental death.
So was it a child sacrifice?
It certainly looks like it, I don't draw that conclusion in the book. I just, in the book I try to just the facts, ma'am, as, what's his name? Jack Webb used to say. I try to just, my biases are, I'm sure, very evident to readers, but I try not to, tell people what to think and how to interpret it. You know, I mean, I know how I interpret the facts, but, you know, as far as the book's concerned, I just try to basically just lay out the facts and let people draw their own conclusions. But to me, it looks a lot like a ritual sacrifice. You know, the timing and the circumstances and the strange connections and the parents' very, very odd reaction to it. It just kind of reeks to me. So yeah, he was only 3 years old. I think it was right before Christmas in 1963, I want to say. And, so yeah, not the way that most parents would react to the death of their only child, you know, like hours before Christmas morning when presumably all of their presents are wrapped and ready to put under the tree, you know. I don't think most parents would go out and party that night, you know? So, it's almost like they were celebrating, his death. And, so, yeah, you know, I mean, and then, you know, when you consider the, you know, the Kenneth Anger connection, the fact that Kenneth Anger had kind of identified this kid as Satan, and, you know, it's just a lot of stuff that to me just kind of adds up to that scenario, you know. But,
and once again, was there not a situation where there wasn't a post-mortem done and there was conflicting stories about the cause of death and that kind of thing? So
yeah, I have his death certificate, and it's a very strange document. You know, the accident, quote unquote accident, was reported by their attorney, not by the parents. You know, the first call, the call to authorities was made by their attorney. You know, which is also kind of strange. I mean, if your kid just suddenly has an accident and is in life-threatening condition, the first person you call is not normally your attorney, you know. If you don't have anything to hide, you don't say, "Hey, my kid just had an accident. Can you call and report it to the police for me?" You know, that's not something that normal parents do. And then there was a very, very long time between the death and burial, which I'm not at all sure why. Just, an inordinate amount of time passed before this kid managed to be put into the ground, which is kind of strange to me also. So there's definitely some curiosities in the death certificate that again kind of lead me to believe that this wasn't necessarily an accident.
So were there any other connections with the music scene and Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of connections to the Manson family. You know, Bobby Beausoleil was a roommate of Kenneth Anger, who was, you know, charter member of the Church of Satan. Susan Atkins was recruited from the Church of Satan. She was a dancer in she was one of the dancing witches or something like that in these shows that Anton LaVey used to put on. So there was definitely a lot of connections between the Manson family and LaVey and his church. Whether there's direct connections to the music, not a lot that I've seen. You know, there are some today. Marilyn Manson is a member of the Church of Satan.
Okay. That is interesting. Huh. That is very, very weird. Now,
and also a big fan of Charlie Manson, of course, which is
Charles Manson. He was actually a musician, right? Charles Manson.
He is. He's singer-songwriter, and considered a very good one, by a lot of the people on the scene. And, you know, he was pretty much accepted as a peer by a lot of the people on the scene before the murders. Of course, after the murders, you know, I mean, people couldn't distance themselves fast enough from him. But before, you know, I mean, he lived for an entire summer with Dennis Wilson, summer of '68, the summer before the murders. Him and various members of his entourage spent the entire summer living with Dennis Wilson, who fed them and supplied them with, you know, paid for their medical care and fed them and supplied them with cars and, for the entire summer. And, during that time, through him, they met a lot of other, musicians on the scene. Neil Young was a huge fan. Neil Young was so impressed that he tried to get his record company to sign Charlie. And, various other people lobbied to get him signed as well. There were, quite a few people who were very impressed, with what he had to offer. And, again, if things had gone a little differently, Charlie Manson might have had a much different, life arc than what he may be. We may view him today as sort of another James Taylor, rather than as the most notorious, mass murderer in the nation's history. So, these people weren't that far removed from one another. So it's a very, very strange mix. Very strange mix of murderers, musicians, and intelligence personnel, and up-and-coming politicians who are all sort of intermingled in Laurel Canyon.
So who did you finally decide was behind this whole music scene? Is it the CIA? Is it the military-industrial complex? Is it Satan? I mean, what do you think?
I would just say the intelligence community in general, which most people just kind of, the CIA is kind of a catch-all term, and when people throw that out, they don't necessarily mean the CIA. So there's all kinds of alphabet agencies that are interlinked, naval intelligence, all the military branches have their own, intel, and there's just an array of intelligence entities that are all interlinked. So and just collectively kind of known as the CIA. So I would say in that sense it was the CIA, I guess.
So and what was their goal? What were they trying to do with this music scene that they created?
That's a good question. One thing I think was to defang the anti-war movement. I think they knew from very early on that the war was going to escalate and go on for a long time, and that there was going to be a lot of popular opposition to it as the body count mounted. And they, were taking, they were laying the groundwork for sabotaging, any real anti-war movement. The whole hippie ethos, was really kind of counterproductive as far as affecting social change. You had people like Timothy Leary preaching, turn on, tune in, drop out, and, people endorsing the sort of the commune way of life. And, the mindset was kind of, you can't really fix all the stuff that's wrong with the world. So just go off and form your own little utopia, form your own little communal utopia where everything's good and don't worry about the rest of the world. And, so that was kind of the mindset that was really preached, through Leary and others. And, I think Leary told the crowd once that the way to stop the war was just to forget about it, just turn your back on it, just ignore it, or words to that effect. And so, so that was, that's great on an individual basis, if you can find your own little personal utopia, but that's not the way to really affect any kind of meaningful change on a society-wide level, obviously. So, I think, that was a key part of it. And the corruption of the music industry, which is just escalated to the point now where it's just, I don't even know where these people come from nowadays. We just get these like fully formed stars that just seem to come out of nowhere, and before you know it, they have, like 18 million Twitter followers, and their YouTube videos are getting 100 million hits, and they're just getting this fame and international recognition that's just wildly out of proportion to their actual level of talent, Oh,
sure.
And it's like, and that's something that comes up. People say, Are you saying that all these 60s rock stars weren't actually talented, that they only got to where they were because of their connections? And no, I'm not saying that. Some of them, I think were definitely overrated, but there was definitely some exceptionally talented people in that movement. And I don't know if you can really say that today. I think we've kind of I think the star making machine, I think that was kind of the early, more innocent days of the star making machine, and we've now advanced to the point where talent is really of secondary importance, if that. And if you have a marketable face and a marketable image, and they can auto tune you and make you a star, and it's just completely corrupted the whole music and entertainment industry, to the point now where we have very manufactured, talents, where these people just appear out of nowhere and are just these huge stars, like overnight. So I think it's all a continuation of that process, and they've just they've mastered the art of star making, from what were the early days then till now.
They've sexualized it as well. I mean, that's something I've seen in my lifetime. It's just been incredible. It's not, I mean, I watch some of these videos and I just think that's soft porn. And there's girls of 10 or 11 watching this and emulating these people, and it's just horrific.
Yeah, it's really become really blatant, and I mean, I don't consider myself a prude by any means, but I do have 3 daughters, all grown now, and I'm glad they're grown now, because there's a definite pattern, there's this Disney pattern where these young girls start off in the Disney sphere, which is, what could be more good and pure and wholesome than Disney, right? So you get people like Christina Aguilera, came from Disney. Britney Spears, Miley Cyrus, who was on Hannah Montana. The latest one is Ariana Grande, who also came out of the Disney stables. And they all follow the same pattern. I mean, they're all, good and wholesome, and then they gather these armies of very, very young fans, and then as soon as they hit their 18th birthday, they're on stage doing a pole dance, and their followers are following them, because they don't know any better. And that definitely seems to be a pattern that's been played out repeatedly. Just one after another. You see these Disney girls gone bad, so to speak,
A recording engineer once told me that they now have microphones that will actually move the tone of your voice up or down. So some of these people can actually be singing off key, but the microphone will auto-correct the sound of their voice.
The technology is just, it's amazing. There was a video that got out a month or two ago that it was later claimed that it was fraudulent, but I don't think it actually was. It was a undoctored audio of Britney Spears singing her new song before it had been auto-tuned and processed and subjected to all the studio gimmickry. And if that was an accurate recording, that girl cannot sing to save her life, and yet she's a huge multi-platinum, multi-million-dollar selling, artist. So yeah, it's a sad state of affairs where we've come. And the 60s, to the extent that it was controlled, which I believe it was, it seems very innocent, actually, compared to what we are subjected to now. And, which is just blatantly manufactured and just loaded with these high profile performances that, like the Super Bowls and the award shows, every year, and these videos that people like, Miley Cyrus and all these others, Beyonce and Rihanna and Lady Gaga and whatever, they're just absolutely loaded with occult and Masonic symbolism. That's just, it's just so obvious. It's, there's whole websites that that can tell you, what you're looking at. But I mean, it's become so blatant that you don't even need that, I mean, it's just like right in your face now.
I think what's really interesting as well is to look at it in context of the history of the time. Like, I was thinking about this today with Tony Blair, when he got into power, in this country, the whole kind of Britpop movement was a part of that. He was seen as, he was so cool. He was the new Labour, new leader of Labour, Mr. Smiley. I'd been out of the country for a while and I came home and, everyone was desperate to get rid of, Thatcherism and the Tories. And so they were really plugging him, and he was seen shaking hands with rock bands and all this kind of crap. And because I'd been away, Tony Blair, and because I'd been away, I just thought, who is this guy? And everyone was sort of taken in by him, and he got into being the next prime minister. And
is it true that he's related to George Orwell? I've heard that he's in the film, whose real name was Eric Blair, right?
So I've heard, could be true. I don't know. I've not looked into it. I need to look into that.
And my other question is, are you guys seceding or what?
Pardon?
Don't you have a vote coming up in the next week or something?
Oh, that little thing. Yeah, we do. On the 18th, we vote for yes or no to independence from Westminster and being governed by our own government. And unfortunately, we still will have certain trappings like the Queen and all that rubbish. But, I mean, if we get the yes, then it's a go-ahead for that. So I'm hoping, obviously, for yes. And it's been really fascinating watching it. It sort of started off with everyone thinking, it's a bit of a grassroots movement. It's not really gonna, go anywhere. And, talking about pattern recognition and social engineering, it's been fascinating watching that unfold here. Because they started blackmailing us, they've threatened us, they've patronized us, insulted us, and now they're begging us. It's like, okay, fine, So who knows?
According to the LA Times, it's narrowly leading now. I mean, it had been, like you say, originally, didn't seem to have a huge amount of support. But according to my paper, it's now looking like it's going to pass.
Oh, I don't want to jinx it in any way. I mean, that anything could happen really, but I've been impressed. I've been really surprised. And if anything else, it started people talking and debating about the future of this country because we've had enough of it.
Is London's going to accept that? I mean, they're going to.
Well, they don't have much choice. If we vote for independence, this has been an ongoing issue for many, many years. The devolution debate and all the rest of it. They knew this was coming. They made the date and so be it, I don't think they believed it. I don't think the Westminster lot really thought it would get this far in terms of, that we're looking like it could be a yes. You know what I mean? It's like they've tried to woo us, and especially in the last week, it's been hilarious. I mean, it's just, the atmosphere is hard to describe. I live in a little village and I'm not in Glasgow, but I've watched a lot of stuff on the YouTube and everything about, people celebrating and parties, and there's not a lot of no campaigners there, and there has been a bit of trouble here and there, but nothing, not too heavy considering how heated it could get. But I can imagine the pubs tonight are going to be very interesting to say the least, because this is the last Saturday before the vote. So yeah, interesting times.
Yeah, that's so the vote's on Thursday?
Yeah, on the 18th, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I've always wanted to go to Scotland. I've been to Ireland, but I've never been to Scotland. I've heard it's just gorgeous, the Scottish Highlands.
Yeah. Well, I know that because I was the one that proposed to you on Facebook. Do you remember that?
You are?
Do you remember your yeah, I did. Yeah. You remember your post that you made about how it was very hard to be, what was it? You were talking about dating and how you wanted to go on online dating. And you posted a whole thing about your conspiracy theorist and what was it, your serial marriager or something, or I can't remember. It was very funny anyway, and you smoked a lot. And I just laughed out loud. It was a welcome break from something else I'd been reading. So I immediately said, will you marry me? And you said, I've got nothing better to do. Was your response.
Oh.
Which I thought was really even funnier. But, you know, what was interesting about that was all these women started to get like, oh, I saw him first. I thought, well, there you go. I've started something here. So
yeah.
I'm amazed you didn't get a serious offer after all that.
Yeah, well, some of them are a little too enthusiastic, I think. But all the ones that seemed to be interested were hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, unfortunately. So, it didn't seem to go too far, but yeah, it's, online dating doesn't work so well for me. I have too many, red flags apparently in my profile. So, I like me just the way I am, but I guess the online community doesn't so much. So, yeah, I did not realize that was you. Well, hello, very nice to meet you.
Yeah, that was me. I was joking around. Don't worry about it. But
I should have recognized that name actually, because it's not all that common.
No, I was going to see if you did, but I thought I'll give him time, and then I didn't want to say it right at the beginning in case you thought I was some weird stalker or something. Oh my God, that's something in the face. Considering the subject matter we've been talking about tonight. So yeah. Anyway, back to
Mhairead, I'm glad you brought it up, so I wouldn't be accused of setting this up, which I really didn't. It was just one of those things that happens, you know. It's kind of bizarre, actually.
Well, Mark talked about your. Was it Sophia Smallstorm an interview? He said, we need to get Dave McGowan on. And that was, I think that was before or after the proposal, I can't remember. I just said it as a joke. But, yeah. I'm getting embarrassed now.
Well, you're the right age. You said you were born in 61. I was born in 60, so, yeah, but, you're a little far away, I guess.
I know.
On. It's not that far, Dave. Just hop on a plane. Come on, man.
Yeah, we got Skype these days, and it's almost as good as being there, right?
There you go.
That's what they say. Yeah.
Oh, anyway, I guess we better back to the topic, right?
What?
I want to bring back up the monkeys. Let's talk about the monkeys some more.
Well, do we have to?
Yes, we do, definitely. Because one of these guys, Mike Nesmith, he inherited a family fortune, right?
Yeah, his mom invented whiteout, actually, the typing correction fluid, which I guess is probably almost obsolete nowadays, isn't it?
Sure.
Nobody actually uses typewriters anymore, but yeah, it was a very valuable commodity at one time, and she left him quite a bit of cash. Well, but he's not far from being the only one. There were a number of people in that scene who came from considerable wealth. You know, that was another kind of anomaly of the scene, you know, in addition to a lot of people coming from military and military intel families. A lot of them also came from considerable wealth. David Crosby's family was quite wealthy and very well connected, going back like over 200 years. They've been very active politically. And Graham Parsons' family, very, very wealthy. They at one time owned the majority of the citrus groves in Florida and Georgia. Ned Doheny was from the Doheny oil clan, one of the wealthiest families ever in LA. So there were quite a few people who, they were known as, the trust fund kids, among their peers, they, came from quite a bit of wealth.
Do you know why they chose these wealthy kids?
No, not necessarily. But But, there are definitely some people there that came from a very, very privileged, sort of upbringing. These weren't like starving artists who had suffered for their art, for 10 years before being discovered or anything like that. These were rich kids who showed up in Laurel Canyon and, were signing, recording contracts within a matter of weeks and building bands around themselves.
And, who wrote the lyrics to some of these songs? For example, Stephen Stills, he has that song, it's called For What It's Worth, I think. And I can read some of the lyrics here. Very interesting. It says, there's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I got to beware. I think it's time to stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Battle lines being drawn. Nobody right if everyone's wrong. People speaking their minds, getting so much resistance from behind. Do you think Stephen Stills wrote that?
Supposedly he did. If he did, he wrote it in record time. It was supposedly written in response. That's an interesting song. It's greatly misunderstood. It's viewed as one of the sort of seminal protest songs of the 60s and the kind of the penultimate anti-war song, commentary on anti-war protests. And that's not actually what it was written about at all. It was written about the so-called riot on the Sunset Strip, which was a couple hundred kids being up in arms over the fact that a popular club was being closed. Not a real politically motivated sort of a protest. So, that actually had nothing to do with anti-war protests at all. It was written in response to that specific incident on Sunset Boulevard. And was released like within a matter of days. It was just remarkable how quickly it was recorded and released. The incident happened, and then like literally within days, the thing was playing on the radio. So if he did write it, he did so and he wasn't even there. Actually, he was up in San Francisco at the time, wasn't even there when this went down. So it wasn't based on his. Certainly wasn't based on his personal observations because he wasn't even there. It's very, very odd that this song came out with the speed it did from somebody that wasn't even actually there. And he later like all but disowned it and said that he was not a fan of protest songs and he thought protest songs were stupid and he didn't want to be known as a protest songwriter and, kind of distanced himself from it. So, it's an interesting little song, and if you actually listen to the lyrics as you were reading them, it's basically, it's kind of putting down protesters, carrying signs saying, I don't remember what the lyrics are, but it kind of disparages and saying nobody's right if everybody's wrong, basically saying the protesters are no more right than what they're protesting against. And, what's the lyric? Carrying signs saying hooray for our side, which is kind of dismissive, really. It's kind of, okay, that's what the protesters are doing, carrying signs saying hooray for our side, so as a protest song, it kind of misses the mark, really, it's kind of dismissive of protesters and again, it wasn't even written about the protest that everybody thinks that it was written about. It was written about specifically about the so-called riot on the Sunset Strip, which wasn't actually a riot. It was a confrontation between the LAPD and a bunch of kids who were upset that this club was being closed to widen the road.
Mhairead, did you have a question?
The amount of murders that happened throughout, the history of Laurel Canyon is pretty extraordinary, and a lot of them are pretty violent as well. There seems to be a lot of violence associated with that area. Did that shock you when you started researching that, or did you have a kind of feeling that would be the case?
It did to some extent, because again, it's just wildly at odds with the peace, love, and understanding vibe that we're, supposed to associate with the hippies in the 60s counterculture. And, everything's flowers and love and whatnot. But there was actually an incredibly violent backdrop to that, and just an astounding number of deaths, often under very violent and questionable circumstances. And just a massive trail of blood leading out of that canyon. And again, that's another thing that sort of suggests to me that this wasn't a real organic sort of a scene. I mean, if you look closely at any good conspiracy, there's always a trail of bodies leading away from it. Whether it's the Kennedy assassination or what have you, there's always a body trail. It's always one of the clues that you may not be being told the full truth on what happened, because people tend to get silenced and whatnot, and that seems to have been the case here. There was just an astounding number of people, people who died in the canyon or were killed in the canyon, or people closely connected to the canyon, who died under unusual circumstances and often very violent circumstances elsewhere. Some of them are acknowledged as murders. A lot of them are kind of written off as whatever, suicides or accidents. But there are a pretty fair number of people whose deaths are, acknowledged as murders. So there was definitely a very violent backdrop to what was supposed to be a very, peace and love scene.
So today in the alternative movement, do we see a controlled opposition being set up? And I'll just throw a name out there. I mean, I'm a fan of Alex Jones. I'm not putting down Alex, but sometimes it makes me wonder, because he's so just trying to rile people up all the time. Kind of buy your guns. Those are the bad guys. Now he's talking about civil war all the time. What do you think about that, Dave?
I used to listen to him, not because I like him or agree with him, but just to kind of monitor what he's pitching these days. But I haven't listened to him for a while, so I haven't heard the Civil War stuff. But he's I don't know. He's a profiteer at the very least.
Right.
I mean, he stirs up fear and then sells all of this survival stuff. Seed banks and generators and propane refrigerators and just a withering array of survivalist gear. Food and water and this and that, and he deliberately stokes that fear and then sends people over to his his little online store to stock up on all of this very questionable in my opinion, very questionable merchandise. And the guy's a cottage industry. My God, between his radio show and the advertising on his websites and the products that he sells and the DVDs and whatnot, and he's making a lot of money off of the fear that he stirs up in his listeners. I just
makes you wonder. Definitely.
That's one radio show I haven't done. He hasn't contacted me, and I've gotten just an amazing array of interview requests since. I've been overwhelmed by how many shows that I never even heard of, calling me up wanting me to come on, and so far I have not gotten any offers from Alex. So I don't know that I would even do it if he did. I mean, I know the guy's got a huge audience and he could definitely, get my book out to a wider audience, but I just have very serious reservations about being affiliated in any way with that guy. Just don't have a good feeling about that at all, really.
Interesting.
Did you hear much about Jimmy Savile case over there? I mean, are you familiar with what happened here with Jimmy Savile?
Yeah, I've been hearing about it for quite a while, actually. But my previous book, Program to Kill, delved pretty deeply into that type of thing, and so I get emails all the time from people. So I was getting stuff by email well before the the mainstream media finally picked up on the story. You know, there were definitely indications and evidence bouncing around, you know, before the mainstream media decided to pick up the story. So,
that's interesting. Would you consider writing about that? Or I know it's been a huge project to take on, but.
Well, somebody definitely should, you know. Yeah, you know, I don't know. Somebody over there would probably be better situated to knock on the right doors or whatever and talk to the right people or hopefully, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that would be something that I would, yeah, I don't know.
We're almost out of time, guys. David, please tell us about your book again and your website.
My book is Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. The website is at davesweb.cnchost.com, where you can pick up signed copies. What else can I tell you? It's getting rave reviews on Amazon. Last time I checked, it had 85 reviews on Amazon, which just absolutely amazes me because it's only been out since April 30th. So that's what? Like 4.5 months, something like that. And it's already passed up by a long shot all of my previous 3 books, which have been on Amazon for at least 10 years. Program to Kill's been on there for 10 years. It was released in 2004. And it has like 34 reviews, and my other 2 books were released even earlier than that in like 2000, 2001, and they have even less reviews. So this one has gotten more reviews in 4 months than my other books have gotten in 10 plus years. So that's been very gratifying. It's been very, very well received, and it's just been yeah, it's been very gratifying to see the response, the reception that it seems to be getting. So, hopefully it will continue to do well.
I think it will. I think it's well deserved, actually. I recommend
Thank you.
it.
I put a lot of work into that thing. I mean, just years.
Oh, you can tell. You can tell.
And even after the original, all the hours I put into it as a web series, developing it as a web series, then fashioning it into a book, I put hundreds more hours into it, fine tuning it and just going over it and over it with a fine tooth comb to just try to make it the very best possible telling of the story that I could. So I really put a lot of work into this thing. So it's very gratifying that it's, people seem to notice that and appreciate it. So,
thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. Great.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. I'll see you on Facebook.
Definitely.
Good night.
Good night.